Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this chat with me, Chris van der Kuyl. I'm delighted today to be joined by Marta Krupinska from Google for Startups, but a serial entrepreneur in her own right. Marta, for those of you that haven't read her CV, was born in Poland and then came onto the European tech scene several years ago. For those of you who don't know, although my Dutch name says it all, I'm as much Polish as I am Dutch. I have one Polish grandfather, one Dutch grandfather, a true Euro mongrel. So I'm delighted to be joined by somebody from Poland today. Marta, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. And should I say dzień dobry? Do you speak any Polish?
Dzień dobry, yeah. That's about it. Dzień dobry, dziękuję. Not too much more than that.
Everything else is inappropriate, so let's keep it at that.
Yes, indeed. How did you know my family? Marta, we've only got 15 minutes today, so I'd like to really go straight into it. We'll talk about Google for Startups as we go on, I'm sure, but I'd love first to hear your own entry into the world of entrepreneurship and technology business, and specifically Asimo, which I know was an enormously successful part of your career.
Yeah, well, thank you, and yes, and I hope yeah, definitely still is. So yeah, sort of my path to tech was circuitous, as I'm sure it is for many. I actually studied psychology, and whilst I was back in 2006 and 2007, my best friend wanted to go on a trip around the world. Off the back of this came an idea for a social media platform that would allow to connect with travelers around the world, and that was sort of the first project I'd worked on. We were very young, very stupid. We had a lot of users and a big success other than financial. And after 3.5 years of blood, sweat, and tears, we went spectacularly fast. Well, this completely broke my heart and sent me on my travels. And after living a little bit in New York, when I remembered and realized the challenges of sending money internationally, I moved to London in 2012 with my Polish passport that then granted me the right to live and work in the UK, and went on a quest to meet people with whom I could build that vision, which was low cost and easy international money transfers that you could do online rather than spending hours and hours and lots of money using the likes of Western Union. And sort of Asimo was born in 2012 with 3 other entrepreneurs, a couple of them very experienced in financial services, and sort of the idea was indeed easy, how to be able to send money with a touch of a button. And sort of 8 years later, Asimo has a couple of million users across Europe. We're the largest independent chain for international transfers anywhere out of Europe into the world, sending to bank and cash and mobile top-up, sometimes even home delivery, which is particularly interesting when somebody rocks up on a scooter and delivers cash to your door. But obviously, sort of that's not been an easy challenge. And I'd say the main thing that I've contributed to that was the knowledge of the user and the first-hand experience. Having been a migrant myself, I live in Dublin for a short while, where I had my first money transfer sending experience. I actually ended up flying home with cash in my underwear because that was way cheaper than sending money home to my mother. So I had a lot of passion for the user and a lot of passion for the solution. And I think it was very clear that we were only as good as our ability to deliver exactly what the user wanted. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't a tricky run. And especially our fundraising process. Asimo raised almost 80 million over the years. But to fund an international money transfer, quite tricky. Early days, fintech, no one has even heard of it, especially back in 2012, 2013. We had users telling us, how do you expect me to put my debit card details into a website? Are you going to steal my money? So much of it was such a fascinating journey to, probably that was only 2 years after iPhone was invented.
It's quite interesting. You obviously chose financial services as a problem that you personally had experienced and other people had, but you weren't alone in seeing that. I mean, there was a number of people entered the market, as well as you mentioned, companies like Western Union and the banks and TravelX who kind of dominated that. Was that with so much potential competition? Were you not put off yourself, and B, when you went to raise money, was that one of the biggest things that people said? Well, you'll never succeed because 10 people that have either failed before you or will make sure you don't. How did you deal with that challenge? Some of the companies out there that maybe have not got the most unique idea, they're actually coming in to disrupt an existing industry. How did you approach that? How did you face the fact that it was always going to be something that people would throw at you and not believe?
So it's a fascinating challenge indeed, and actually, so my co-founders had previously built an offline money transfers, and that was their first venture into the online world, and they had experienced firsthand their conversations with their board members, who, when faced with the possibility of putting the money transfer service online, responded with something along the lines of, "Oh, but these stupid migrants can barely read and write, so how would they ever use a phone or website?" Now, any migrant would know, or in fact probably these days, especially under Corona, we all know that our relationships with our families look like this. So actually being technologically savvy is an absolute prerequisite. So a lot of first of all, actually the money transfer industry is incredibly fragmented. Western Union only really has 20% of the market, or had at the time, which meant that there was a lot of room for individual players. There was an incredible opportunity to build a brand that users would relate to, and this is something that I love about financial services, and I sort of stayed in financial services throughout my later startup career. People really expect very little from their financial providers. I am sure whoever is watching this, if I was to ask you if you like your bank or if you like your financial services provider, maybe 3% of you would raise your hand, unless you're using a Starling or a Monzo, one of the new challenger banks. But the deal with Western Union or comparable services was that users expected to get a bad deal. And that was also similar with investors or with other players in the industry. There was a common understanding that there is a lot to be fixed. So everything from dropping the prices from the average of 10% per transfer to the average of 2, or actually 1.5 when we were starting, that created a hell of a lot of opportunity to lure people to use your product while still building a very sustainable business model, because the fantastic thing about Azumo was you acquire a customer once, they trust in the system, they know that it works, and then they're going to continue coming back to you. So it was a very simple sort of cost per acquisition versus lifetime value revenue model. We would pay for a customer, or ideally we wouldn't have to because they would have heard about us otherwise, but even if we did have to pay to acquire a customer, they would then continue coming back to us, and whilst we would only make a small amount per single transaction, if they stayed with us for a year or 2 or 7 or 8, as many actually have, that actually created a sound business model and happy users because they didn't have to overpay. And obviously it required a hell of a lot of explaining, and not everybody got it early days, and some people were afraid because regulated services, but we can now see years later, TransferWise, spectacular success, World Remit doing fantastically well, and all of these businesses and us were sort of 2 years older or younger, and a bunch of other players who have managed to create niches in their particular corridors or in their countries. And I think that's only healthy if you're confident in the product that you're building, that you can watch what the competition is doing but not let it take you out.
Brilliant, amazing. So your journey didn't stop there. I mean, that would be kind of for many people a great place to sort of stay and dig in and keep that journey as your principal thing. But you then have developed a whole load of other interests and lots of things that you're involved in. But the one that obviously you sort of represent, today is the journey that you've made with Google for startups. It'd be great for the audience, I think, to hear what that is. What the kind of the way you look at business and the way you've supported the business over the past few years. And maybe reflect a little bit, I think, on, as I look at some of the businesses that we support now, innumerable, almost all of them could not exist before cloud-based services to scale up. At a point, many of these businesses that we are involved in, want to specifically think of like Broker Insights or even TV Squared, are enormous data analytics engines, which if it was a decade ago, I'd be trying to raise a serious ton of money to buy a bunch of Sun hardware to power it. Now it's a case of switching on cloud-based services and the things running by tea time. So how do you fit into that new economy and that new world with GFS?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. And actually, maybe I'll tell you a little bit of a backstory as to why a founder goes and joins the corporate, which was I never aspired to have a job. I'm still absolutely freaked out about the idea of having an actual job. Or although I will say that a time of a global pandemic was probably not the worst time to be employed by the third largest company in the world, and I'm very grateful for that. But essentially, I stepped down from Asmo end of 2017 and was looking for new ideas. And in 2018, I co-founded a new startup called FreeUp, which now rebranded into Earned. And the idea was simple, was to give people access to their salary ahead of payday. So, when you think about it, it's the fluke of industrialism that we work the whole month, but we only get our money at the end of the month, and many have to borrow tons of money. Actually, 50% of families in the UK can't afford an unexpected expense of £250. So, if only we had access to our salaries earlier, we could avoid a lot of debt. So I sort of started that journey with a couple of brilliant co-founders, and I was really stunned by the fact that this was my first time around. I've done this already. I sort of knew what I was doing. It was still bloody difficult. It wasn't getting any easier than it had been the first or second time around. Plus, I also felt like I was still very often the only woman in the room. I couldn't see any racial diversity around me, not much diversity of thought. Everyone was from London in a little bubble. And it just didn't really feel like much was changing, even though years have passed. And this is when Google came along and said, hey, wouldn't you like to support startups on our behalf? And I'm like, which startups? Oh, the ones that you please. I'm like, okay, now we're talking. That's very interesting. And of course it's a little bit more nuanced than that. But Google for Startups is a non-revenue generating arm of Google, which uses access to the best of Google's connections, products, and resources to accelerate startups. And the fantastic thing about running a non-revenue generating part of an organization is, first of all, we don't have to push any products. It really is about bringing promising founders that are solving important problems with technology. I think that's also something that I'm really passionate about. It's all good if you want to build another platform to sell stuff to people that they can't afford. That's fine. But I think the incredible thing, and it's interesting you mentioned, simplicity of access to cloud services, it's never been easier to build a company. And I think this is when true democratization comes in, because you don't need to have, daddy doesn't need to have given you £1 million, and you haven't had to do it 7 times before to be able to prove your concept and show to potential investors or to the world that you're onto something. So we really have this ability to come in and look at founders with big visions, big ambitions, big talent to solve important problems, and do that with technology, and just to give them that hand, especially as we know that diversity, equality, or in fact equity in tech is not always what it should be. So it feels fantastic to be able to sort of Robin Hood style give a hand to those who perhaps did not come from these pre-existing positions of power, and make sure that they have a good enough chance at succeeding as well. So we have worked with some fantastic companies that use machine learning for social good. We've done a couple of cohorts of women founders, and we know that women still are underrepresented in tech, underfunded, come in with less resources to start with, plus other systemic challenges that they face. So it really feels fantastic to be able to laser focus our resources on this. And something that I was really passionate about, I felt like it was, I joined Google in 2018, sorry, and it did feel a real privilege to be appointed as head of Google for Startups in the UK. And I, as you pointed out, am a migrant, and I really want to be very aware of my limitations and what I don't know. And I went with my team on a little tour around the UK, speaking to founders. We spent a chunk of time in Edinburgh, although I know we still haven't made it to Glasgow. I apologize. I know I've spoken to a lot of people in Glasgow since we can do this online. And understanding what the ecosystems in other places in the UK look like, and what do they need, and how can we best support them. And we actually ran a cohort of startups from across the UK, not London, earlier this year throughout the pandemic, and it's been just great to be able to use the power and the clout of Google as a large organization to shine a light on these pockets of founders and talent and opportunity that really deserve to have those stories told.
That's fantastic to hear, and great your enthusiasm seems to show no bounds through this. And of course, I can speak on behalf of everybody in the audience today. You're more than welcome in real life as well as virtually to come to Scotland. And I would say, as well as Glasgow and Edinburgh, let me put a shout out for the ecosystem in Dundee, because we've got some amazing tech businesses up here that you need to find out about. So, Marta Krupinska, thank you so much for joining us today. And back to you in the Scottish Edge finals. Thank you.